Good morning. Good morning. Much better, thank you. I heard the bell ring, so it's time to get started. Before we do, it looks like we got a pretty thin crowd today. Must be a lot of folks. The Howards, David is teaching Aaron's class because the rest of the family's off in Tennessee. So there's others that are sick, traveling. Keep those in your thoughts and prayers. Andrea has not had a good week. She's had another infection plus what the old country folks call a summer cold on top of that. So as soon as class is over today, I'm going to need to leave and go check on her. And we do thank you for all your inquiries on her and your thoughts and your prayers. Brother Kelvin, would you lead us in a prayer, please?
Father God, we want to say thank you this morning for allowing us to be here to study a portion of your word. We thank you for help and strength that you have given us this morning. We pray for those who did not have it, were not able to be here, Sister Andrea and all those continue to be on our prayer list. We're asking, Father, that you will strengthen them and that you will heal them and give them a portion of health and strength that they may be able to be with us at the next appointment. Now we ask as we go through this classroom this morning, bring back the recollection of the things that Brother Sattler has prepared for us. We ask that you help us to open up our hearts to receive your word, which is able to save, which is able to help us understand your will and what we must do in this world. And more importantly, and as importantly, Father, to go out and teach others, Father, that they may be able to be brought in to your wonderful storehouse, to your wonderful kingdom, to be citizens of your church. Thank you for this morning. We thank you for all things that you have done and all you know you continue to do for each and every one of us. We thank you in Jesus' name.
We gather, we assemble so we can learn from each other and edify one another. Brother Kelvin came up to me earlier today, but right before class, and he said, "We're ready to learn what you have to say this morning." So I got to thinking about it. Well, maybe I'll just turn this thing around and I'll just ask questions and let y'all teach the class. So I do have some questions at the end of the class, but I won't do that to you right up front. Today's lesson is on that word up there that I have a hard time saying. So what I did, I had it looked up the definition of it so I could break it out, and I still have difficulty. My tongue, being a North Alabama country tongue, just don't like to twist that way sometimes, but it's the best I can figure it out is vestigial. Is that close enough, Jeremy? You don't know either. Okay. Sounds good. But in biology, the term basically means that an organ or part of the body degenerates, the rudimentary atrophies. Atrophy just means basically it dies. It having become functionless in the course of evolution. So this organ that we'll be looking at, or organs that we'll be looking at, are from the evolutionary side of the fence. We have a number of organs that are no longer necessary. They're leftover. Let's begin with a scripture verse. Psalm 139:13. If you recall, I had this one last week, and I had used the ESV as being the plainest for us to really know what it says. "For you have formed my inward parts," talking about God. God has formed the inward parts. "You knitted me together in my mother's womb." We didn't look at the following verse 14, which is also important. Hate to interrupt sneezes. And it says, I will praise thee. Who's he praising? He's praising God. For I am fearfully. What does the word fearfully here mean? Something to be afraid of?
Respectfully.
I'm sorry?
Respectfully.
Respect or respectfully.
Awe. A-W-E, awe. I think it means that way in this particular verse.
Okay. And wonderfully made. So I'm praising God because he was respectful making me, made me wonderful. And then it says, marvelous are thy works. All we have to do is go out on some starry night and just look at the heavens, or go up into the mountains and look over the scenery, or go to the desert, go any place and just look at what God created, and they are marvelous works. The last part of that phrase, and that my soul knoweth right well. In other words, the writer of this is fully convinced. He's more verses I want to look at before we get into it any farther, and one of them is Psalms 8, verses 4 and 5. What is man that thou art mindful of him, and the son of man that thou visitest him? For thou hast made him a little lower than the angels, and hast crowned him with the glory and honor. So God only made us, was respectful in making us, or wonderfully made. He has crowned us with glory and honor. And in Hebrews in the New Testament, Hebrews 2 and verse 17 says the same thing. Thou hast made him a little lower than the angels, crownest him with glory and honor, and didst set him over the works of thy hands. Now, the evolutionary theory that we have been looking at for the past few months basically says things adapt and change over time. So here's where I have some difficulty with this vestigial theory that things are left over. If we change over time and we adapt and we take on new things, why do we have useless things left over? Why don't we slough them off and go on? You know, a snake sheds its skin. It outgrows it, it sloughs it off, and it moves on. It don't hang on to it longer than it's needed. So, when we're looking at this part, I think it's always helpful if we can look at history and put things in timelines. So if we go back, all the way back to Aristotle in the 4th century BC, in his History of Animals, he called a mole, said it was stunted in development and that its eyes were worthless because it couldn't see very well, and he didn't understand why a mole still had eyes. So that's how far back people are looking at things along this nature about changing and not needing any more. Then in 1798, I'm not even going to try to pronounce this guy's name, but he noted, and his comment is, whereas useless in this circumstance, these rudiments have not been eliminated because nature never works by rapid jumps, and she always leaves vestiges of an organ, even though it is completely superfluous if that organ plays an important role in the other species of the same family. So that's 1798. We're going to jump a little bit and go up to 1893, jump almost a century here, and go to Robert Wittersham. He published a book called The Structure of Man, and in that book, it's a book of anatomy and is relevant to man's evolutionary history. And he said, Organs have become wholly or in part functionless, some appearing in the embryo alone, others present during life constantly or inconstantly. For the greater part, organs which may be rightly termed vestigial. Now, a later version of his work, well, first off, he listed 86 organs in the human body that's worthless, no good anymore. Later work added more to that, and a fellow by the name of Horatio Newman, this was read at the Scopes trial in 1925. Anybody know what the Scopes trial was all about? Evolution in school. Trial was taking place in Tennessee. But this is what they said. There are, according to Wittersham, no less than 180 vestigial structures in the human body, sufficient to make of a man a veritable walking museum of antiquities. Now, if we go back to our study that we looked at on Psalms 13:14, God made us, we're wonderfully made. Did God give us any, let's start out with spare. Did God give us any spare parts, or did he use just what he needed?
He used just what he needed.
I'm sorry?
He used just what he needed.
Used just what he needed.
They did give us spares. We got a spare kidney.
Got a spare kidney, we really only need one. We function better with two, but a lung. Okay. Did God give us any body parts that heal themselves? Liver heals itself. I'm sorry? Now, every cell in the human body, and I kind of hate to use this term regenerate, but it replaces itself. Every cell in the human body replaces itself over time. They don't all do it at the same time. They don't all do it on the same schedule. Some say up to 7 years, some say up to 10 years, that the whole body, new cells have replaced old cells, except 3 items. You know what those 3 items happen to be? Brain is one of them. Now, there's been some recent research that says the hippocampus will regrow some parts, but I'm not sure of that yet. I don't think enough studies been done, but the brain does not regenerate cells or replace cells. What else? Enamel on your teeth. If you wear your enamel out, it's gone. There's no replacing it. Does not And there's one other thing. The lens of the eye. It's with you from birth till death. Those 3 things are not replaced. So, as complex as the human body is, and as long as we've been studying the human body, and with all that we know about it, there is still a lot of unknown about the human body. Are they identifying any new? Yes, sir.
You say everything renews every 7 or 10 years or whatever. The question I have is, how come we still age if everything becomes new? I mean, 10 years from now, I'll be a lot older than I am now, even though I got new cells.
I've asked myself that same question, but I don't have a good answer. So, are they still identifying, learning new parts of the body? No doctors, scientists, or?
They're not necessarily new parts, they're just parts they've figured out.
They're parts we've always had, but in 2018, scientists, the medical community has identified this section here. And again, I look up the definition. It's interstitium, which is through the whole body, but they had never studied it on a living person before. They'd always been dead, so the fluid drains away, dries up, and it's not there. So as late as 2018, they're identifying parts of our body that they say, if other scientists agree with, that should be called an organ. It was spotted when researchers looked at live human tissue with a new imaging technique. Previous methods mostly looked at tissue that's dead and drained of fluid, so the cavities weren't visible. The team reports in Scientific Reports anatomy textbooks may need revising if other researchers agree that the interstitium is, in fact, a newly identified organ. Not a new organ, but a newly identified organ. Now, as I think about the timeline and the history of the subject that we're on, I understand why some people can get the idea that of things going out of use, not needed, the adaptation idea. But I have difficulty understanding how they do it today with all the technology that we have today and all the scientific reports that are out there today. How can they still look at this and still think that there are organs that have served no purpose anymore? So my conclusion is that it's all based on the starting point. Now, what do I mean by that? What's the starting point? If I am a person that believes, either through my own study or taught or whatever, but if I believe in evolution, my starting point is based on that. And so if I see an organ that we'll discuss later, that like an appendix, well, that's not needed, so it has to be left over. That's my conclusion. My starting point is from that. However, being a Christian, my starting point goes over here. God made everything. So that appendix, my conclusion is we don't know what it does yet. We're still learning things. So those are the two viewpoints that you have to take into account. Now, part of the immune system, and one thing that they termed as no longer useful, is the tonsil. But tonsils have now been found to help filter out germs that enter through the nose and the mouth, and to protect the rest of the body from an infection. I still have mine. Don't know why, because when I was a youngster, I had tonsillitis about once every 3 days, whether I wanted it or not. I was constantly sick with tonsillitis. And my folks just kept putting it off and putting it off, which I'm thankful for, because I didn't want to go under the knife for that, but I managed to keep mine. At times there are reasons sometimes to remove things, but now they have figured out that that's not a worthless organ, that it is still useful in filtering out things that way. The tonsil was described as early back as, tonsillectomy was done as far back as about 50 AD, according to this fellow here. However, the modern techniques that are used were done in the early 1900s. Ottoman Empire had something to do with that. Now when we come to this little thing called the appendix that gives a lot of people problems, I still have mine. How many of you have been taught in school and otherwise that the appendix has no value. It's just causes you to get sick on occasions. Don't do any good. Anybody been taught that? Immune system to help keep you healthy. It first serves as a reservoir of good bacteria in case of a gut infection. Now I'm going to try to say this, to the good bacteria, how is it replaced? They have found out that the appendix is basically the storehouse, and that's where it replenishes it from. And secondly, it has immune cells in it that even helps some cancers. Now, in 1735, Dr. Claudius performed the world's first successful appendectomy in London, England. It was an 11-year-old boy that had swallowed a pin and had perforated the appendix. So in 1735, this doctor managed a successful appendectomy. An appendectomy due to being sick, getting infected, was done about 24 years later. But notice this, general anesthesia was not available until about a century later. There are people in the 1700s undergoing an appendectomy with no anesthesia. Do you know what that form of anesthesia was called? Brute force. Just hold them down and start cutting. I've already said that in 2000, I didn't say this part, in 2007 researchers determined that the appendix hosts a lot of bacteria besides functioning as a safe house for gut bacteria. The appendix also contains some immune cells that can react quickly to fight off infections. Your appendix has several types of immune cells, including B cells, T cells, macrophages, natural killer T cells, and cells that make antimicrobial peptides. So it's not a worthless organ anymore. What about hair? This also was called a outdated or now an organ with no value. Does hair have a value? Then why do a lot of women shave most of it off? It can be good or it can be bad, but hair has a... Let me ask you a question when it comes to hair. Does hair transmit signals to the brain?
Yes.
Does the brain transmit signals to hair? Is it a one-way road or a two-way street?
When you're chilled, hair's going to
Bingo. It's a two-way street, because if your brain says, hey, I'm getting kind of chilly, and you notice the hair is on your arm standing up, you can't do it with long sleeve shirts, but if the hair on your arm stands up, why did the brain tell the hair on your arm to stand up?
create more insulation.
Trap more air, create more insulation. Some of us in here lived in the woods when we were younger. How many of you have that little spidey sense? Hairs on the back of your neck stand up. How many of you have been out in the woods and felt a hair moving on your leg or arm and looked down and swatted a tick off? An invasive little creature or other things. So a hair is not a worthless organ. it has uses. I'm going to ask you some true or false questions now. Evolutionists believe that humans have body parts that are left over from evolution. True or false? Well, evolutionists believe it, not me. Evolutionists believe that. That is true. Human body hair does not have an important function. We just went through that one. That's a false one. And then scientists are beginning to realize the body parts once considered useless are quite helpful. Okay. Got a couple of fill in the blanks. At one time, scientists believed there were over blank vestigial organs. I'll take two answers on this one because of, if you read Apologetics Press material, it gives one number, and I have given you another number in the class here. Pardon? 180, according to that. Now, Apologetics Press says 100, which that's true also. It's over 100. So, can you even name 180 organs in our body?
How many did people have to take it out?
No blank can be called vestigial unless it can be proved that it has no function. What blank? What organ? And then researchers have discovered that the blank helps fight certain types of cancer cells. Pardon? Appendix. Now we're going to discuss a few things. For the rest of the class, we'll be discussing about 4 different items here. The first one is wisdom teeth, because those that believe that some organs are no longer valid, they bring up wisdom teeth, that's a leftover. That wisdom teeth were at one point needed because early man, how did early man eat? What did he eat? He gnawed on a lot of raw meat and stuff of that nature. And now they say that the jaw is becoming smaller, so there's no room for those teeth. And also they're not needed anymore because we eat differently. What's your thoughts on that? Or do you have one?
I was born without it.
You was born without them?
So
Oh man, you're evolving a step ahead of us here, aren't you?
I don't have it.
Okay. Yes, ma'am.
I'm sure they have a purpose.
They have no less purpose than any other. They're, and I don't know why people started that, but they just started taking them out. When I was young, almost as soon as wisdom teeth would come in, people would want to pull them out. Now,
I had mine full, and I guess that's why I'm not smart.
well, I did not have mine pulled because of the reason that just to get them out, but elbows in basketball helped remove a few of mine. So, yes, sir.
I'm not convinced that man was eating raw meat. I mean, where do they get that? I mean, I'm not expecting you to answer that, but I'm not convinced that man ever ate raw meat, just, as a general rule.
Well, if you believe the evolutionary line of things, where we started, that's where it. However, me believing the Bible from day one, when God put Adam and Eve in the garden, He provided them food. Wasn't meat, but it was food. When they came off the ark, now everything's legal. but they also knew about fire. They knew how to cook. They knew how to drain the blood and they're told not to eat the blood. So I'm with you on that I don't think man ever did, but from the other viewpoint, if you look at evolution from the ape on up, and if we go back to hair loss, that is why they think that the hair is a leftover and of no value, is because in their viewpoint, we migrated from ape, we lost hair on the way up. So what little hair we have left now is just a leftover. It shouldn't be here. So, but I don't believe man ever had to eat raw meat. So, anything else on teeth? Well, let's look at the coccyx. We have a medical technician amongst us. What is that little thing called the coccyx? Have a tail, and that it is of no value. Many of us, ligaments and muscles attached to it that support the rest of the body, and also, can you imagine trying to sit down without a tailbone? I mean, it's tough enough to sit down on when you bruised it, but if you didn't have one, how are you going to sit straight? It sort of acts like a shock absorber also. So it is a vital element in our body. It helps us. Anything else on that? Okay, now we're getting into an area that I know zero about. Hind legs on sperm whales. I don't know anything about whales. I don't like the ocean. I like to go across it, but I don't like to be on it. There's things out there big enough to eat me versus me catching and eating them, so I just don't like anything to do with it. So I'm not familiar at all, so I had to do a lot of reading and research to get into this. Does anybody know for a fact about hind legs on a whale? Well, what I've been able to glean from my study is that there are things that look like leftover appendages near the end of close to the tail of a whale, but then those people that study whales and know about them say that those are useful to help the whale give birth to the young. I don't know how it works. I'm not into whales, don't know that much about it, so I just have to take the experts at their word. So does that sound reasonable? Now, God would not have made something without a purpose. So, questions or comments on the whales?
Larry, can we go back to the tailbone?
Sure.
Does the tip there, that's the actual part that we're talking about, does that have any kind of ligaments or anything that makes it move? Because it looks like it should.
No, well, as an embryo and all, yes, it's separate, and there could be 4 or 5, but they fuse during the growth process. So by the time a person reaches the adolescent age, that is fused into one. Anything else on that? Okay. Anything else on the whale?
You don't have a picture of the legs on the whale?
No, sir. I didn't want to dive in that deep of water, so. And I also don't have pictures of the next one coming up either, because I stay as far away from these creatures as I possibly can. Snake legs. Anybody in here handle snakes? On purpose?
Only when I got,
Pardon?
only when I have to.
Only when I have to, and that's taking care of dispatching them, right?
Yes, sir.
Well, again, I know nothing about snakes other than I don't like them. I try to stay as far away from them as I possibly can. But according to the people in the know, snakes have, again, close to their tail, small stump-like appendages, not very big, but kind of small and stunted, that they call legs. And again, from the experts, they say that those are useful in helping the snake lay eggs, etc. So again, that's getting outside my area of knowledge, so I'm going to trust them on that. But all the things that we have gone through today, snakes, whale, coccyx, wisdom teeth, hair, appendix, tonsils, and we could probably go to some more. But at one time, people thought that those were of no value, no use anymore. But as study and through the experts, they say that no, they got a reason. So, questions or comments? No? Well, we've got about 7 minutes, so I'm going to do this. I'm going to go back to that verse and just try to close with that verse. And remember, the writer of this said, I will praise thee, God, for I am respectfully and wonderfully made. Marvelous are thy works, and that my soul knoweth right well. I am convinced of that. That's going to be our last slide. And is anybody, excuse me a second. I've got the leftovers of Andrea's summer coal. So. Is anybody in here convinced that God created us fearfully and wonderfully, and that all his works are marvelous? Anybody?
The thing that gets me is facial features of everybody is different.
Yeah.
It's marvelous, wonderful. You look at some people, they got that frown on their face, pretty soon you can change it to a smile. It feels good.
Now, since you mentioned that everybody looks different, no two faces are alike except when you get into identical twins. And does anybody know that an identical twin, their DNA is still not identical? They can be specifically identified by DNA. They'll show there's a relationship that close, but they can identify each individual of the twin by DNA. So from day one, everything started on DNA, and as things go along, from the very beginning, from the first man to now, we all look different, but we're all men and we're all women. We hadn't changed into half goat or anything else along the line. So,
We still got arms, legs, and stuff.
for the most part, everybody has two of each, right? Okay. Any other comments?
I thought when you mentioned the snake legs that you were going to go back to Genesis chapter 3. Do you think the snake had legs before that? It's a possibility anyway.
You are asking my personal opinion on that, right? Not what I can find and prove by the Bible?
Didn't say in the Bible.
Okay. I personally believe that the serpent did have legs. Now, the reason I'm saying that is, why would it have been when God told the serpent that you're going to crawl on your belly, what was that reason for? It was for punishment, right? What would have been the punishment if the snake was already crawling on its belly? So I am drawing some things from way out here to here, and please don't take that and put it in the bank. That is just my opinion. Do you have one? Huh?
I think that makes good sense.
Okay.
Same opinion.
Anybody got a different idea on that? Brother Golden?
I'm sorry, not a different idea. on
Okay.
that, But I was just gonna mention that the Bible says that, man was made of one blood. And, as late as World War I, they wouldn't give blood of one race to another race. The Bible had that disproved in the beginning.
That is quite true. And
Shows the Bible is always correct.
but that comes from what man was doing, not what Bible taught, because Bible teaches that it don't matter. We're all from one race. I mean, there is only one race. There's the human race. Man has divided it up into 4 categories and then 22 subcategories. But according to the Bible and God, God made Adam and Eve. And as we discussed last week when we was looking at mitochondrial DNA, it all went back to 3 lines, back to one woman. And on the man side, Y chromosome side, it all went back to one through Noah, his sons. So I know when I was a youngster, you're about as old as I am, you went through the same things when they was talking about races and things of that nature being different. And even in the church, which I had trouble with, but even in the church back in those days, some people was trying to point out that slavery was good because it was in the Bible. However, Bible slavery was totally different than what was being used in this country in the 1700s and all. It wasn't a particular race. They were taking people captive in war. People were selling themselves because they couldn't make it on their own. But they tried to justify it, and I had trouble because of what we're discussing. God made one race. I've used this before in class. If we had a genealogy tree big enough, and if we had the ability to research it, somewhere along the leaf, the limb, the branch, the trunk, or where the trunk branches, somewhere back to the root, every one of us in here, every one of us in the world has a common ancestor. Saved by the bell. Thank y'all so much.